Delighted to have your company again for another Music at Madden's upstairs here in Madden's Bar in Belfast, the home of traditional music in the city, where we have chats with members of our traditional music family. And who knows where these chats can go? There's no shortage of stories, crack, reminiscences. And new episodes drop every single Monday, and we have an ever growing back catalogue. If you're new to the podcast, well, get busy and have a listen. And we drop on Spotify and on Apple and on YouTube as well. So we're thrilled this week to have one of our biggest musical talents and exports that you've made time for a chat. He has bold musical imagination and he's a supreme talent. Brian Finnegan from Armagh is here in the snug. Do you see this? He's like a laugh there when I said a supreme talent.
Chortle.
Chortle. Founding member of Fluke Can, and at the moment releasing new music and touring with the most recent band, the Hunger of the Skin band, which is phenomenal. And that kind of developed out of the album of the same title to bring the music to life. And do you know the thing with you, Brian, is that each time you release new music, it feels to me that you reach a level where it's like, oh my goodness, what's he done this time? It's incredible. And then the next thing comes along and it beats what's gone before. It's just something else. So you're very welcome to Music of Madness.
Oh, thank
It's
you
great
so
to have
much.
you.
The bucket list moment. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Well, let's talk about. I want to go first to Bone Memory. This is the new track they just released with the Hunger of the Skin band. Tell me about this, because I thought it would be good to use as a starting point today, because you're exploring what you call a charged threshold between childhood and adulthood in this most recent track, and how that has shifted and blurred and disappeared entirely for young people. I couldn't help but wonder, is that coming from your experience now as a father, seeing young people, grow up before your very eyes, and then thinking back to what your experience was like?
Yeah, a bit of everything, Lynette. I think it's kind of been fermenting for 20 years. I kind of growing up in the north. During the kind of hot days of the Troubles. You kind of I had sport and music, and at least I had kind of some sense of a rudder by which to navigate, that landscape. And it maybe even growing up at that time was a rite of passage, because you were fairly anchored in a community. You had a sense of belonging, which I find now is just almost disappearing. We've almost become estranged from that sense of belonging. Where the culture is, it's kind of, it's not, the parameters are just not as they were, when you were growing up. I was growing up, and sometimes you think your memory plays tricks on you, was it as rosy as that? But I kind of, I just have two youngsters now, and one of them is navigating those turbulent waters between, young adolescent and adulthood. And I can see the complications and how it is these days to be that age. The idea of a rite of passage for me was really profound, because my sister's a social anthropologist, so conversations with her about it, and conversations with Eva, my wife, who's really has very passionate about ceremony and ritual coming from Mexico. So it all kind of distilled into the early days of the pandemic, when I was walking back and forth from my house to the top of Navan Fort. And the family has a long association with Navan Fort, because my mum was born on one side, my dad on the other. My grandfather Malachy worked on the Dudley Waterman excavation of Navan. And so I kind of, I had a sense of the majesty of the place and how important it was. And then, started the Troubles. There were youngsters kind of started gathering because they were chased out of town for, off the streets. And because the maintenance of the site had stopped, it was like, it wasn't long before the place was just desecrated. There was cans and bottles everywhere, and two of the big sentient trees were cut down.
And the respect for it was lost.
Yeah, no, and I thought, it was almost like, I was watching these kids and they were playing a role because, they'd been cast out, out of harm's way, out of sight. They were trouble. So if they're going to be trouble, let's just be trouble. Like if we have this role to play, if we're not trusted to be adults and we can't stay in childhood, and it made me really sad. I thought, these are the future custodians of our world. We have a right as adults to, like, at least help them traverse this time, and empower them with a sense of what's possible. Because if you don't, then they're just gonna. There's an expression you hear a lot: emerging adulthood, where they kind of drift in over a long period of time and confused. And yeah, I kind of wrote Bone Memory with all that kind of whirling around, but then looking at, yeah, my son Oline and seeing what was playing out for him as well. So it was I had ringside seats.
The ringside seat thing is it comes to the fore in your music, and particularly in your compositions, where you bring us into your world, bring us into how you're seeing things, how you're observing various aspects of life, of nature, whatever it seems to be that's chiming with you at that particular time in your life. And that Hunger of the Skin album, like, I don't know, it served to capture that moment of the pandemic in a way, Brian, that I thought really you couldn't help but be really touched by it, literally, because the Hunger of the Skin was something that we were all we didn't have, and what's the word I'm looking for? No, we were starved of it, really.
Denied it,
I
yeah.
were denied it. We were denied it during that time, yeah.
Yeah.
And like, do you think do you find yourself now, getting older, that that's the way you're approaching music, when it's really something that you want to say?
Yeah, but like when I was because I was thinking about that album quite a lot, and I was like, I never really set out to write an album like that. For me, there was a big wobble at the beginning of for everyone, I guess, and I just knew from experience that, the best thing that I could do for my own peace of mind and was to practice, because I found that practice helped me quieten. I have this kind of ritual that I go into whenever take myself off to practice, which is just really about being still. And I thought, my mind is like a vindaloo right now. I'm just thinking about how I'm going to cope and blah blah. So I started to practice, and out of the practice, then, came not immediately. It was quite a long gestation, and yeah. So, but it was a defiant record. I felt, not a lot of people. There's people can't listen to that album, because it was very unlike me, and the music was writing the rules, but the music has always written the rules for me. I try not to meddle, I know that I have to be in a certain practiced state to receive it, and then I just kind of stay out of the way and hold on for dear life sometimes, because that it just blows through with this kind of oceanic power. And if my chops aren't right, it'll just go somewhere else. If my head's not right, if I'm not quiet enough. And so it was only when I looked back that I saw that how all the dots joined up, and it was that volume of work that was really about the time. It was bookmarked by the
Yeah.
start and the end of COVID.
But also then it's brought a new chapter to your career as a musician, because you now have the Hunger of the Skin band, who I think, because when you were recording the album, am I right in thinking maybe 20 musicians on it, was something crazy like that,
I know,
but
yeah.
mostly done remotely,
All
or
done
all
remotely.
done remotely?
Not any two of them in the same room, apart from me and Sean Oak. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and then you bring the band together to perform the music live. And I remember being at the first gig. I was delighted and honoured to have been there, because it was a moment. Just I'll never forget it. That feeling of after the pandemic, thinking, right, okay, we're back. But you'd awoken something really different in yourself and in your music there, with bringing that ensemble together. And I just thought, bands have been such a big part of your life, and part of your music since the start, Brian.
Yeah.
And we were talking just before we started recording here about the days in school when
Sort of.
the band was everything. It was
Yeah, yeah.
everything to be in the band.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
What was it about being in a band, or why did you ever want to be in a band?
Well, do you know, I kind of I was blessed being growing up in the Pipers Club, being a student, past pupil of the Pipers Club, and there were many times, when I would have been invited to various functions, and we played a couple of big international conventions with Tommaso Fee, Cardinal O'Fee, because he was a huge fan of trad music, and he would have invited the Pipers Club to come and so it was kind of empowering for a youngster, to be on a stage and the kind of the brotherhood, sisterhood of like traveling with people and kids my age away from home, the thrill of being able to shake free of the folks for a few nights. Yeah, I just thought, wow, I can't believe the maybe the seed had been germinating from there, but
Yeah.
that I could play music and see the world and yeah, get out of the parish for a while and yeah.
Yeah, get out of the parish for a while, yet the parish is always with you. Like Armagh is always with you.
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's in the bones, like literally in the bone memory
Hmm.
of you as a person, of your music, of everything you do. And I do remember that night in the Marketplace Theatre where it really came across just how much like you love Armagh. Like you really, really brought the love to the fore that night, Brian.
Do you know, it's I mean, I do love Armagh, and I kind of when you're in your teens, you invest a lot of your energy trying to get out and see the world, and then you realize that it's like that Paulo Coelho book, The Alchemist. That's a beautiful story, parable of a young seeker who has to circumnavigate the globe to realize that he was in the right place all along. And there's just now it's I can see it as a father as well. It's a safe, it's a lovely place to grow up, and it's got a nice ambience and not much happening after 9 o'clock, like, but
Maybe as a father, you're happy enough with that too.
yeah.
And I suppose you get to the age for the jammies, you don't want to be going out after 9 o'clock.
Mm.
But whenever you were younger, though, how did music present itself to you? How did you find it? How did it find you?
Well, I was just blessed that I grew up in Armagh at the time that the Pipers Club and the Valleys were empowering kids to be culturally and musically literate, through the classes. And yeah, my first Pipers Club class was a Tuesday night. My folks were involved in the athletic club, so it was a kind of slightly unorthodox backdoor into music. We were all athletes. I say athletes. I was definitely not cut from athletic material back then. I used to have this orange bonnet in keeping with the county colours, and I'd see every photographs of cross country races. That'd just be like this snake of kids way around two fields, and I'm way at the back of this orange bonnet coming. And yeah, but yeah, that was we all then went to the Pipers Club, and my two sisters played fiddle, one sang, and I just didn't love it immediately. I was all at sea, but it didn't take long before it started to make sense, and
Did I make up the story that Brian Vallely identified that you were a good runner? That meant you must have had good lungs, so he handed you a whistle. Did I make that up?
I think it might have been the flute that
Oh, the flute he
I'd been
handed you.
playing the whistle for a wee while, and then Brian arrived down to the house in Longstone one night with a flute and said, "I think you've got the lungs for this," which yeah. I'm still trying to figure out where that third lung might be for that flute. But yeah, anyway. So yeah, no, that was, and once I was in, or once music had started to kind of burn in me, it felt like I had asthma, as a kid, so I generally felt like life had kind of slipped away. That I was struggling to keep up. It had left me behind, and music just helped me. It felt right. It felt like physically right, emotionally right, that I should be playing an instrument that actually challenged me because I was struggling with my breath, sort of blowing into something, and now that I see, because I think with so much love and admiration for the Brian and Ethan and the way that they taught, there's something really rudimentary about if you're playing an instrument with that you have to breathe into, that there should be some emphasis on breath, because it wasn't until I was in my teens that I started to think, So if you've got all this technique and you've got all these tunes and this repertoire, and you know what makes people different underneath, you know, if everyone's practicing the same amount, what's how is this music, why does he sound different from me, and why do I love that but I don't love that? And so I started kind of asking bigger questions about, you know, where music might be coming from, and I quickly pinpointed it as breath. You know, if I was breathing right, everything else was right. Right, tone was right, uh, phrasing, stretching, just yeah. When I was breathing right, my head was quiet, and your head will always ruin everything if you let it. You know, it's always there to sabotage these moments. You know,
So
so,
would you say, looking back now, would you say that in your teenage years you recognize that if the breathing's right, not just your playing and your music's right, your head's right, you're right.
oh, totally.
Did you in that moment, did you recognize that what you were talking about was mindfulness? What you were talking about was all of that is very popular now and very fashionable now.
Not at the time, yeah.
Yeah.
I hadn't got a clue, but I just knew that if it felt right, then I was just gonna keep doing it. You know, it was just kind of instinctual. But you know, when I started doing gigs, I could never quite because there was a lot of emphasis then on, you know, like the gig being a way in. It was an opening into like a bigger party scene and the social, and it just went on and on and on. And I was always felt a wee bit estranged because I never felt that I had anything else to say after a gig. It's weird, and I still do it. You know, like after a gig, I just feel quiet. I feel empty. You know, because I think, you know, music for me was medicine. It was like it really was cathartic, and I played every note like my life depended on it, and it wasn't just the cool notes or the funky notes. It was all the ones in between that I paid particular attention to, because you're never a stranger in your own tunes, but I felt that I had a responsibility in other people's tunes to play them just as well as I could. And so after a gig, I just wanted a piece of toast and go to bed. You know, I didn't really feel that I needed to go to a pub. And that was just me. Maybe if I'd played a concertina, I would have lightened up a bit.
But you could see when you explain your approach, you could understand why maybe the quiet was what you craved. And maybe you're a bit tired, you're exhausted because of all the breathing, the technique, everything you've been doing there and giving it your all for the duration of the gig. Like I think that makes complete sense. But in order to get the breath right, when you recognize that that's what you had to do,
Hmm.
it's one thing recognizing that that's what you have to do. I think we all recognize that breathing is a huge tool that we should all have in our toolkit for
Hmm.
ourselves. But not all of us can get it right. Not all of us know how to do the breathing. We think it's, the 6 beats in, four out. Is it five or is it four? Is it, what's the metric? But how did you get it right for yourself? Like, what did you put in place to get there?
Well, part of my rehabilitation, I guess, you know, when I had asthma was breathing exercises. So I was doing that a lot. You know, just trying to strengthen my lungs. You know, I had an inhaler, a couple of different inhalers as well. You know, but I was just really, I was aware of my breath, and so I would have been doing these breathing exercises. I was doing quite a bit of swimming. And then later in life, you know, I met this guy. One night I was on tour in India, and he gave me this technique about breathing, which is I kind of seen a couple of jazzers doing it as well. It's kind of exhaling into your fist, so you're restricting. You're not stopping the breath,
Right.
but you restrict it, and by doing 5 reps of that. So I do that every time I play now. You know, I maybe do 2 cycles of it, but what it does is it slows your breath down, which kind of mimics the way that you would be playing if you were playing a whistle or a flute. You're not giving it all away too quickly. It's how you control the outflow. So you know, that, but also what it does is it really, when you breathe and exhale into your fist, it just zones you out. You just, at like 6 or 7 puffs, I'm quiet. Yeah. And I try, you know, it's actually a technique that you can try with youngsters as well. And you feel the air in the room change after people have did this like 6, 7 times. There's no bother, it's just like,
I'll be trying that tomorrow morning at about 5 to 8, Brian, when there will be the inevitable battle of shoes on, coat on to get out the door. I'm
yeah.
gonna try that, and I'll be
Right,
letting you know.
listen up, guys. Come on, get that fist.
We can do this.
Yeah.
This week's episode of Music at Madden's is brought to you by Pizza Works, North Belfast's #1 independent pizza shop, and one of my favourites, I can honestly say. It's an unfussy restaurant and it whips up classic and signature pizzas. There's chicken wings, goujons, all the dips, and all done with personality as well. Speedy delivery or collection 7 days a week, and you can follow on socials. Pizza Works, North Belfast. This week's episode of Music at Madden's is brought to you by Madden's Bar itself, the home of trad in Belfast City, where you'll find live music 7 nights a week. And as well as that, let me tell you what other things go on here in Madden's. Wednesday night is dancing night, set dancing and step dancing. Thursday nights, it's Gaelic agus Pinty. Slow session on the first Monday of every month. There's a teenage session on the first Sunday of every month. Kids come as far as Dublin to take part in that session. We have the Sunday song concerts upstairs here where we record the podcast on the first Sunday of every month. Ishka Vilfarsche, the Whiskey Club, is on the second Monday of every month. And of course, the Music at Madden's podcast, which is recorded here at least once a month. And the proceeds of the podcast go towards the Madden's Bursary Scheme, providing summer school scholarships for children and teenagers to music schools, festivals and Irish language courses in the Gaeltacht. So keep up to date. Follow Madden's Bar on socials, particularly Instagram and TikTok. So you're
And
recognising
follow
that's
Music
really
at Madden's
astute
as well for the
and
crack.
I suppose there's a lot of awareness there as well, even recognising that in your teenage years, that if you get all this right, then would I be right in saying also that you recognise that if this was all right, possibility, is there anything is possible really?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I do. You mean in music?
In music, yeah.
Yeah.
You could push your boundaries, whatever took your fancy, because you've this incredible curiosity about music, and I wanted to get to that about I read an interview you'd given years ago about seeing Jean-Michel Vaillant in Armagh, and again I suppose that goes back to the Armagh Pipers Club. It goes back to Brian and Ethna's insatiable appetite for music. And not only that, but telling people they had to come to Armagh and they had to play. That exposure to music at that age,
Yeah.
at the height of the Troubles. Like, we need to explain this to people. It was really unusual. So I know you had the Matt Malloy music and he was a big influence, but seeing Jean-Michel Vaillant, can you remember that feeling? Can you remember what it was like? What happened in your mind when you saw and heard him play?
I think it was a kind of revolution, because I I hadn't really I'd kind of grown up playing playing jigs and reels, and I'd gone through a couple of flats at that stage, but there was something inside me that was kind of just restless. I didn't have a name for it at that stage, but I had already started kind of diddling wee bits of tunes to myself that I didn't recognize, and I was in denial, I didn't know what they were, so I went through a process of trying to figure out why I was kept having these wee floaters of tunes, and eventually, yeah, just it's funny because I think that these moments arrive to inspire kids. If you've got a talent, it's a kind of treacherous passage through those kind of early teenage years, when you could be easily distracted and led away, and it was no different then, and I kind of think now, looking back, I was the great thing, the genius behind the Brian and Ethna was, yeah, as you said, so they would invite bands to come, but it wasn't even that they would come and do a gig and then clear off. They come and do a gig, but then Brian would have them in the session with the kids. So you got to rub shoulders with these heroes, and there was just a fragrance I can only describe it as a fragrance of Jean-Michel that I'd never never experienced. It was exotic and it was wild and it was just, yeah, it was like a primal sense that, he was locked in and engaged with something that I wanted to know. There was a majesty in his playing, the way he could, like, it was almost like he had this such control of his breath. Have you ever watched a whale's tail, the fluke, in the water, the way that it kind of bends water? Well, he could do that with his diaphragm and air. And when you listen to him and you could feel it, it was like, it was godliness that was playing him, and he was almost like oblivious to the fact that there were people there. He was so engaged in just being that light, that, just so free. And yeah, I remember, like, I couldn't sleep for nights after seeing that gig, and I thought, what? That's just, I couldn't believe it was a flute that he was playing, because I'd never heard a flute played like that.
So then, when you have an experience like that, obviously you want to follow up on it, and you want to maybe go and learn as much as you can, and soak up as much as you can. But we're talking, what, late 80s here? What would be when we didn't have computers, music wasn't readily available. I'd say the Armagh music shops, uh, the shelves were limited in what they were stocking in terms of traditional folk music, world music.
Woolworth?
Woolworth. No posters of Jean-Michel Vaillant and Woolworths at the
No.
front of the shop, Brian. So how do you satisfy that curiosity and that appetite then that is just awoken in you? Like, how do you build on it?
I think that was where the kind of writing came in. It must have been the first yeah, failed attempts at maybe thinking that if I couldn't ignore the music that was in my head, or in my body, I was going to have to do something about it, and that was, I'd have taped a lot of sessions. Any session I'd have went with, I had a wee secret tape recorder, and especially if it was outside of Armagh, because there were different variations of tunes as you travelled, out, rippled out. And I would have did that. I would have mined the radios, at night, for on the radio on a Gaeltachta, for anything exciting that I didn't know. And then it
When you say
all,
mind, sorry to interrupt you, but when you say mind the radio, were you sitting ready to pounce to record?
yeah,
Was it that vibe with the when you heard something, it was like, yeah, I'm documenting this and I'm getting it on my mixtape.
yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah. I just listened to all the radio programs at the time, and just variations of tunes, and tunes that I just hadn't heard from Kerry or Cork, and so that was my main source of material. But even that at a point became, it was just something else. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, it was, and it was the music that was starting to come from somewhere else, that was insistent, and it wasn't getting any quieter. It was becoming more insistent, and it was saying, pay attention. You've got to pay attention. And so eventually I paid attention.
So paying attention to that, uh, Jean Michel just opening up a whole new world, it seems to you. And then do you think that is directly linked to your interest then in music of other places? Because not only was he playing as a flute player, and you were seeing the instrument being played in this way, but he was bringing his music, the music of his region, to the stage, which was music possibly you'd heard maybe bits of, but weren't entirely exposed to at that point. Would that be right?
Yeah, it's a funny thing when you hear a masterful player. I think it isn't even the tradition that you're listening to. I have a sense that it's the human. It's what's playing underneath all. We were saying the technique, the repertoire. What makes one musician different from another? Is it their pain? Is that the story of their lives? And when you start thinking like that, you think, well, then it's all rooted in human condition. If I listen to a Ney player from Iran, I feel the same. It moves me the same way that I would have been moved if I listened to Jean Michel. You know, and so I kind of think that's where I started to connect in music. It wasn't about playing tunes from Sweden or Hungary, or, I was just, if a tune just hit me in the spot. I kind of think humans are a wee bit like antennae. We're tuned. In the old days, you were looking for in the long wave radio, and they're all like the static, and sooner or later you just stumble upon this French or Flemish accent. And I think humans are like that. We're kind of, a tune that I like might just not register with someone else, and And so you kind of tune into that frequency that
Mm-hmm.
is yours. And then when you're in it, you realize that there are other people that are, and that's when the magic, I think, starts to happen because even though you can't see it, once you're in that, you're tuned in, people are moving towards you that you won't see immediately. Opportunities are moving towards you. Musicians, they're talking about bands. I had to earn the right to play with every band that I ever play with. Those are all masterful players. From the very first one right up to the Hunger. I wouldn't have been ready to play in the Hunger of the Skin Band 10 years ago. I wouldn't have lived a life that was worthy of it. And then when I started to tune in more and more to that, then these people started moving in my direction. So
Do you feel stronger now than you ever have in terms of yourself and the music you're producing?
yeah, in terms of the music, and I kind of, I'm there's. I just kind of think to myself, I really don't think too much about it. I thought a wee bit more about the bone memory one because it was something that was very close to my heart, because of the kids, and but I kind of think that, yeah, I see a lot of music going sideways, at the minute, and I think it's commercial, it's safe, and it makes money. But I think that music has to move forward. It's especially now, it has to risk being unpopular, and you know, maybe people will just not like it, and but I know that's the only way I can play is like to take risks and to follow the prompt. For me, it's not. Yeah, there's tons of stuff that is still to be explored, and most of it is out
Mm-hmm.
beyond, where music starts to kind of fray and disintegrate, where I'm not on sure ground. For me, that's the most exciting place to be.
Would you say that it's taken you a very long time to get to that point? Because you issued a tune book a number of years ago, and it's gorgeous. It's 76 tunes, I think, in it. And in the lovely introduction you write, you mentioned the Donegal Lass, which was the first tune you wrote, and you so beautifully describe the how you felt about giving that over to the world, and how you were terrified of this is a part of you that you were putting out there,
Yeah,
but you started with hearing it in Galway, walking through the streets of Galway and hearing this tune coming out of Monroe's, and you were stopped in your tracks. Can you bring me back to that moment?
yeah. I mean, I kind of I was so full of self doubt when I started writing tunes, and I really didn't think they were mine. As it turns out, they're probably not. But they kind of come and they blow through, and then they're on their way to somewhere else. I get to hold their hand for a little while, but when they started, I thought I'm just losing my mind, but I have to get it out. It's obviously not going to go away. And then I thought I'll dedicate it to someone, and then at least they're half responsible for it if nobody likes it. So yeah, and I gave it it was for Ethna, because she meant the world to me and still does. But and then it just kind of went off, and it landed where it was meant to land. And I was in Salt Hill heading towards an overnight bus to the airport, and I was fierce cold winter night. I was going past Monroe's, and I just caught it on the wind. Yeah, it was coming out of the pub, and
From a session?
yeah, it was in the session, and it was in full flow. And I kind of stood outside, and I thought, I'm sure there's people in there don't even know it's mine. And for me, that is the indication that a tune is home, where it should be. To be in a traditional pub like that, being played by all those great musicians, and half of them wouldn't have been thinking this is the Donegal Lass. It would have just been the natural. It would have been the flow of the session that carried them into it, and
Yeah.
yeah, so it was quite a moment. Yeah, and I kind of it made me realize the journey that music can take, and where it's needed.
To go.
Yeah, because it's needed. I need it for a while, and then it goes where there's a hunger for it.
So it's interesting listening to you then about the Donegal Lass and how it came about, and listening and hearing it in that context that day. All the other tunes you've written then, what do you get out of writing tunes? And I suppose in retrospect, how was it for you putting that tune book together? did you think you had written that many? Did you like were you aware of the number? Did you have a number in mind?
No, no, I didn't. You know, I'd kept me in me over the years. I kind of looked back at different albums and I thought maybe, I mean, it'd be nice one day to put them all together. But I kind of, for a long time now, even though they come through me, I don't have any sense of ownership over a tune because I think it's just such a blessing to be able to to carry a tune for a while, and it comes with all of the life that a person pours into anything, like if you're an artist or a playwright or a dancer, I want to believe art. I you know I don't want to, so I kind of think to myself, if the best thing that I can do as a writer is just receive what is already coming towards me, and then it's away. So kind of thinking about putting them all together felt like a bit pretentious. It was just like rounding them all up again. But what I love is I love hearing from them on their journey. So people will write and say, this is what this tune means, and that's what it was very important for this reason. And so then it's such a lovely thing. But while I'm writing it, um, it's kind of indescribable, because it's just a white hot feeling of being held by something that's really ancient and also hot. It is pretty hot, do you to get a tune that's coming through with that kind of
Mm-hmm.
power. And yeah, I just love that process. I love being in that moment. It is. I imagine that I look differently as well when I'm writing. I've never seen myself because maybe I look a bit gormless, but yeah, no, and I spoke to other people who have experienced that, and you can't stay in that moment.
Mm.
It's too intense. But
And how
then,
long would that last typically?
I mean, I'd say the best. It's a cliche, but the best tunes just they come in a
Happen.
flash,
Mm.
and you catch them in a night. Sometimes I have to pursue them a little while, but generally I find that yeah, that kind of breaks the spell if you have to kind of chisel something into shape. Yeah, so I just tend to really kind of listen deeply and be ready.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's a message coming through in what you're saying about both your technique, how you've approached your playing, how you approach writing tunes, how you approach your work. Is that it's a lot of hard work. You have to be really dedicated to it in order for it to come to fruition in the most true way.
Well, when it comes to writing, I find that practice is intrinsically linked because that wild, mysterious muse, that wherever it is that you're tapping into, knows fine readily if you're ready for it. And it's kind of weird, because I mean, it's like to bore people with its small details, but I found that when I was writing Hunger of the Skin for like 6, 7, 8 weeks, I was practicing these kind of weird half-hold scales that were just gnarly, like flats and sharps and in between notes, and I didn't particularly like it, and I couldn't understand why. And then I would try and pedal old tunes to get away from it, and it would lead me back to these certain uh, yeah, movements. And it was only when the tunes started to come and they were full of these notes that I realized that I just wasn't ready to play them. And then fast forward 6 months after Hunger the Skin and I played Doolin Folk Festival, I was horrified that I had to relearn these tunes because I couldn't play them. I hadn't played them since. I was like, who wrote that? What? So I was like, oh God. Yeah, and I kind of think it was all those weeks of practicing and waiting and waiting and waiting, and
Mm.
that mystery was just circling the house, just thinking, you ain't ready yet. Come back tomorrow night.
Okay.
Yeah. And then when it did start to flow, it was like, yeah, I don't think I watched TV for a year. For all of that, from the moment that I started practicing, poor Eva was long suffering. She was like, well, bye then, toodle doo. I just head straight to that corner of the house, and it was me checking in with myself, but it was also I was engaged in this thing that was going on. Yeah,
So the process just takes over.
yeah,
Yeah.
and actually, I'm teetering on the edge of it now. Really, something else is I'm writing again and I recognize it. So
Right, okay, so something else is coming. Yeah, it's happening again. With the hunger of the skin, then, so you know that's the process of making the music and writing the music. Then you put the band together. It looks to me like the band was more or less cherry picked by yourself, people you've worked with in the past, people you respect, people you know are going to bring a particular type of energy and talent to the party, because it is a party, and what an experience it is for anybody who witnesses it live. But has that always been the way with bands? Like going back to school, I love this, Brian. Your first band was called Gan Onium, and it didn't last long. But like, would somebody somewhere please take that name and use it again? Would you allow that?
absolutely, yeah, I stole it. There was quite a few. There was quite a few tunes back in the day. A core called "Real Gan
Gan
Onium" or
Onium.
"Jig Gan Onium," and I thought, oh, great, that'll
Love
do.
it. Love a band without a name. I love it. But whenever you start bands, how did they start? Was it natural? Were you the ringleader? Were you the one who decided, let's do something here? Or what did it take to for you to invest in being in a band?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just liked the conversation. I grew up playing in the Pipers Club, and then competitions never did it for me. I just felt that music needed to be shared. I wasn't a solo. It wasn't like a solo sport. I wanted to be doing it with other people, and so, yeah, coming out of the Pipers Club and the group of cool thing, it just seemed like a natural evolution to ask people that I enjoyed making music with to did they fancy doing a few gigs, lighthearted, and then the enjoyment of finding arrangements. I always love arrangements, and working stuff out, and that's how it kind of took. There were a couple of definite wobbles along the way because there were some things that just didn't work, and bands changing personnel, but you cut your teeth, as you go along, because I didn't know what I was doing, and I made mistakes, and I'm still making mistakes, at various different moments, but that's just how you learn, if everything is goes off without incident, there's no lesson, there's
It's
no.
boring too, Brian. Let's face it.
Yeah,
You need a bit of excitement and have to trying to navigate these things in life,
yeah.
which is all very easy to say in hindsight. But Fluke particularly, you mentioned the whale and its tail. Fluke's 30 years together, and again, as you've rightly mentioned, there bands change their form and things change as they go along. And you and Sarah are there from the start, and then John, Joe, and Ed came on board afterwards. But not too long. It wasn't too long really after the inception of the band they came on board, was it?
Well, Ed was there from the start. I think he only did 2 gigs without Ed. So it was me, Mike, and Sarah. And then after, like, I think a couple of gigs, we decided that we couldn't, we weren't prepared to sit through an entire gig of ourselves again without a guitar. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I suppose whenever you get yourself, Sarah Allen, Mike McGoldrick together, three flutes. What you go, three nation flutes? You called it at one stage,
Yeah,
even though there
that
weren't three
was,
nations in the band.
no,
Right.
no.
Okay.
Yeah, it
Was
was,
that one of those mistakes you're talking about?
but thankfully, yeah, that was one that we learned from. But yeah, no, it was short lived, the Three Nation Flute thing. But when Ed came on board, it was more of a band, and
Yeah.
yeah, and then there was nice reaction to it. So
Oh, that driving rhythm though that he brought, was that, was there excitement with that whenever he entered the fray, or did that change the dynamic, or did it just make what you'd already imagined this to be more real?
I thought it was kind of it was a novelty, having three flutes, and I love Mike's playing. I love his improvisation as well because I love improvising. And he's up to everything. It's like if I would throw something at him, he would throw it back twice. And so I kind of really enjoyed that bouncing, that sparring with him.
Yeah.
But when Ed came along, and that was Mike's call because Ed he studied language in Manchester University, so he would have been in the scene, and Mike knew him, and so. But he came with this whole sensibility of he's an amazing finger picker, and I had never heard anyone that accomplished. Kind of John Renburn, Bert Jansch, Pierre Ben Suzon, and I just couldn't. I loved his playing from the very first moment. It was just different. It wasn't, it wasn't too trad and it wasn't too wild. It was just very, very. And his right hand, his rhythmic right hand. A lot of guitarists all point that out as a major inspiration as in him as a player.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
And then you've got the to add to that rhythm. Then you've the pulsing rhythm. You've got John Joe then, and then Sarah bringing her piano accordion to the mix as well as the flutes. Like I remember seeing the first flute gig here. It was an open house in Belfast, the early 2000s. I think down at the Northern Wig.
Mm,
Electric doesn't even describe the atmosphere in the room. It was just something else. Did you
yeah.
did you feel when you were making music? Was there a feeling that this was special? You're doing something different here.
I think it was, yeah, because in the early days, I think because Fluke were never really we weren't an Irish band and we weren't an English folk band and we weren't a Scottish. There was no Three Nations. We inhabited our own little island, and so that was a kind of that was a very liberating sort of place to be
Yeah.
on the island of Fluke because we didn't think that we needed to play any particular kind of tune. We could just play tunes because we loved them and Mike was cut from that same notion as well, and he was playing tunes from Brittany and
Yeah.
Eastern Europe, and we never really thought like should we not do this because there's obviously Hungarian bands who play this tune better than us or Swedish bands, but we just like yeah we weren't thinking, we were just reacting to and letting the music show us the way. So and maybe there was a certain moment that people needed that on the scene. Also, it was instrumental music, so it was free to go where it wanted to go and be interpreted however people wanted to interpret it, and we were all kind of we were on fire with it there, and then it was just a really exciting time to be playing and I because it was based in England as well, I was spending a lot of time around London, and it was always a wee bit tricky for me coming home because I felt that I should have been, as a musician, maybe I should have been living on the country, and how would it be received coming back to play? But it was all in my head because the gigs, as you say, every time Fluke would come,
It
there'd
was an
be
event.
and there'd be loads of players as well, which is always a good recognition that you're doing something right. Yeah, Cork and Dublin and Belfast. Belfast still, there's nowhere like to do a gig. People in Belfast are just like, yeah, it's one of my favorite places on earth. We did a gig in the Empire there recently, and it was just electric again. It was just like remembering the John Hewitt back in the days of the open house.
What do you think it is about the audiences here and how they receive music? And do you see like has that changed over the years, or is it maybe just finding itself in a different way now?
I think it has. I think it has changed. I think that there's just we're almost like I mean I wouldn't because I'm based in Armagh, but so I can see this. I can feel the magnetic tug of Belfast. It just seems to be the place. It's the Gaelic language. It's everything that's going on. The Belfast Trad Fest, all the work that's been done there to the cross community work. It's like it's just Belfast. It's just I wax lyrical about it all the time when I'm away. People say, "Oh, should I go to Belfast?" You should go to Belfast first and not go anywhere else and stay in Belfast. Don't maybe a couple of days on the west coast, but I just I love the street art in Belfast. I love the vibe. It's just people are just they've embraced it. When you grow up in a civil war, you're thinking to yourself, especially as you go in and decide to have a family of your own, how many generations down the line before this is natural for my kids to live free, to love who they want to love, to walk wherever they want to be in town. And now I see my kids, and it's one generation almost. My eldest went to an integrated school. His friends are Protestants and Poles and Lithuanians, and his girlfriend's father's from here and their mum's from Lithuania, and that's just the way it should be, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just we're there are no others.
How
That's
do you look at that though? Whenever you think back to the time, the times when you were growing up. And I suppose back to the start of our conversation there, where you said that you almost found refuge in the music and the athletics club. The
Mm,
sport and music brought you together and gave you that kind of escapism that you needed as a young lad.
mm,
But sometimes it wasn't something that you could approach very freely, because you were aligning yourself with, particular culture, whatever that expression of culture
mm,
wasn't just as free as it feels to be now that, your children are experiencing.
mm. Yeah, no, I was just really again acutely aware of the two people who were guiding me. I just would have followed them to the end of the earth, you know. I just thought Brian and Ithna, you know, while the place burns around them, they know what they're doing. You know, they I remember Brian saying, you know, like there were people who came to me and said, "What are you wasting your time with culture and music? You know, you should be out on the street." And he knew what he was doing. He knew that the flute and the whistle were every bit as powerful, more powerful than than a loaded gun in the right hands of a child who knew what it's the how the possibility of its own potential and how they could articulate it and carry it and what they could say that a bomb couldn't say and what story they could carry, you know, and pass on for generations, you know. So I could feel it coming from them, and yeah, it didn't matter. Uh, and they also protected us. You know, they made sure that everything around was right for us as well, and just blessed that I was born at that time and into that place.
You've mentioned Brian and Ethna multiple times in our chat today, Brian. And, when I was thinking about our conversation today, obviously I knew they were going to come up, but they've come up in a really natural way to you, that there's a real genuine, it's like deep gratitude you have to them, and love and all those feelings, and admiration and respect.
Mm.
All those feelings are there. The Armagh Pipers Club is 60 years old this year. And they've been there from the start, both of them, giving those opportunities to kids, you know, showing people that culture is important, music's important, music can break down boundaries, it can create friendships and forge friendships that words can't sometimes. Um, what, you know, how would you describe Brian and Ethna to people who are unfortunate enough not to know them?
It's kind of hard, isn't it, to describe that. Just you know, they're as people they're my heroes, and as musicians they're my heroes. They're just the regard that they have for culture and identity and place. It all it's just unequaled. You know, and that's why you know, like sometimes you meet people in your life, you know, and you're aware that you know there aren't any others. They're when they're gone, that's all gone. I have an old neighbor who's a bit like that, and you know he's the last of his kind, and it's kind of they came from somewhere that was very just a very beautiful and it was what they did together. It was what they achieved together because I know that they were two very unique people, had come from different parts of the world, and but when they were together, they were just a powerhouse. You know, they believed in what they were their vocation and what they wanted to give, and they cut the fat away from that wasn't needed. You know, they protected not just the club, but the town, and they just you know they said it wasn't about breeding high achievers or about it was just about the it's almost like my little kid Emil, he goes to a Steiner school, a Waldorf Steiner school, you know, and the emphasis in that education is on the spirit of a child. It's about you know it's about encouraging lifelong curiosity in learning music, and that's what I got from Brian and Ethna. It wasn't right now you've got it, you can go off and do whatever it is. Now that you've won in All Ireland, that you're the man. That wasn't anything to do with their vision for music. It was this is only the beginning of a great journey, and when you're gone, the one thing that will live on is the sound of your song. And if we're only here for one thing on earth in the short time, because it's a moment, it is a moment, and then we're gone. But what a moment if you get to sing your song. And that's what I got from Brian Atha. You're only here for a moment. Don't waste it. Sing the song. Don't worry about national, regional styles. Just be yourself. Yeah.
You've certainly embodied all of that, Brian, and more. And thanks so much for coming and having a chat in the snug today. Brian Finnegan, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.